Hey gang, it's Squill, and man I wish I was reviewing this one in October. Would have made for a great Halloween video. Oh well, the Winter King kinda works better as a November video, so I guess it all balances out. The Star is the 7th episode of Fionna and Cake, and our 3rd multiverse hopping episode. It is also the final episode before we start getting into the series endgame. The Star begins with probably my favorite cold open of the entire series. I love the way this one parallels the opening to Simon Petrikov. While in that scene, Marcy was comforted in that tough time in her life by Simon, here she is all on her own. In a world without Simon, Marcy is left to fend for herself, with no protection or moral guide. I love the reveal of Simon's corpse here, it's such effective imagery. We then see a shadow loom over Marceline that we can now assume is the Vampire King. It's pretty clear that in this world, the Vampire King raised Marceline like she was his daughter. She even calls him dad at multiple points. It makes me wonder what this Marcy's relationship with Hudson was like. We know that Marcy at least knew of Hudson based on a line in Obsidian, as well as the fact that in the Marcy and Hudson flashback, Hudson says a long time no see, implying that she's seen him before. So I don't think it can be a case where Marcy's convinced that the Vampire King actually was her dad the whole time. Considering Marcy's agenda here, she's gotta have a much better relationship with Hudson than the Marcy we're familiar with. After the title card, we cut to modern day as Fionna, Cake, and Simon travel to this universe from Baby World. This is the first episode since Simon Petrikov to not begin immediately where the episode right before left off, as the gang has clearly spent a whole night in Baby World before traveling here. Fionna feeling down on herself from the end of last episode has clearly carried into this one. Fionna gaining a bit more empathy for other people is some great character development for her. It's great to see her try and make more thoughtful decisions throughout the episode. Eventually the gang is attacked by a group of vampires. It was cool seeing Simon fashion some stakes. It was also great seeing Cake having a better grasp of her powers. Cake defeats the zombies and the gang are dropped in on by a tank designed after Peppermint Butler. And who else could be in it but PB, who in this world is just Bonnie. I love this no-nonsense military PB, such a fun take on her. Bonnie informs our gang that the Vampire King has the crown and recruits them to her team. Back in Fionna World, we get our first Gary and Marshall scene as Marshall prepares to see his mom. While I prefer last episode's Gary and Marshall subplot a little bit, this one still has some great stuff in it, and Gary and Marshall are still charming as hell. Meanwhile, in the main plot, Bonnie introduces the gang to the rest of her team. It's kinda surreal seeing a version of present-day Martin who isn't a complete scumbag. Being one of the few remaining humans in this vampire world clearly nurtured the more heroic side of Martin. He actually kinda resembles Finn in some ways, the way he'll leap into action on a moment's notice. I don't really have as much to say about Huntress, but it was cool to see her again. She fits pretty naturally in this world. We get another fun reference to the Stakes miniseries with the garlic bombs, now called Garbos. This whole episode is basically just one big send-up to Stakes, and it's great to see. Especially considering the fact that Stakes is what started the miniseries format, and Fionna and Cake feels like an evolution of said format. This is also our first mention of the Star, the name that this world's Marceline goes by. I absolutely love the rivalry between Bonnie and the Star here, it's probably my favorite aspect of the episode. It's a great expansion upon their bitter exes dynamic from the original show. It gets even better with the implication that the two dated at some point, making them lovers to enemies. After this, we get the reveal that baby Finn is in this world, who Fionna accidentally brought in her backpack. I and a lot of other people were able to guess that baby Finn would be in this episode due to this shot in the intro, so it was cool to be proven right about that. Martin taking care of baby Finn was so wholesome. I feel like this version of Martin could have been a genuinely great dad. Not gonna lie, a part of me was kinda disappointed when he was killed off, because I really liked the idea of him being able to raise baby Finn. It'd be like him getting a second chance at raising Finn. This is a side tangent, but a fun alternate universe idea I had would be one where Finn never left Founders Island and he grew up there with both of his biological parents. A universe like that totally has to exist somewhere in the multiverse. Next, we get our first and only Scarab scene in the episode in which he is seen looking for the Ice Crown in the vampire world. Once he finds it, he's taken away by some mysterious cosmic force, thus removing him from the episode entirely. Back in the B-plot, Marshall introduces Gary to his mom, Hannah Abadir, a rich businesswoman with a really fun design. I really love the spooky vibes of the mansion here, it thematically fits the episode really well. Tons of fun character cameos here too, some of them can be kinda hard to spot. Back to the main plot, we are greeted with the rotting corpse of Billy. Insane imagery, and that's not even the last time we see Billy's corpse in Fionna and Cake. Fionna asking about different ways to kill vampires was very funny. It felt very Finn-like. Eventually, our group is stopped by a couple of humans who turn out to be vampires in disguise. Even though it turned out to be a trick, I do like that this shows a bit of character development for Fionna, actually caring about random people she has no attachment to. It's a decision I couldn't imagine her making earlier on in the season. After the vampires are defeated, the star finally shows up, and she's easily the highlight of the episode. Seeing a version of Marceline who fully embraced being a vampire is just so damn cool. As someone who's missed the trickstery side to Marcy's character from the earlier seasons, this was just great to see. She really just steals the show every time she appears, one of my favorite Marceline portrayals period. I mean, in her first scene alone, she straight up kills Martin. And while I still wish Martin got to stick around for a little longer, I can't deny that this is a great character establishing moment for her. Bonnie yelling, "I'm not a loser," was so funny, probably my favorite joke in the episode. Despite how brief it was, the Simon and Marcy flashback, as Simon tells Bonnie about his world's Marceline, was great to see. We also get another fun stakes reference. After Bonnie's tank is destroyed, Cake suggests that she replace it. I loved Fionna being so protective over Cake here, it was very sweet. Fionna and Cake's dynamic is very interesting in this episode. While Cake is still in adventure mode, Fionna is trying to take things more cautiously. Back in Fionna world, we see Gary talking to investors about his ideas. Not too much to note in this scene, other than Gary catching Hannah act somewhat condescendingly towards Marshall. I also quite like the design for Marjar, the human gender-swapped version of Maja. Back in the main plot, Fionna asks Simon if he thinks Baby Finn will be okay. We then cut to Baby Finn still in the tank. I originally really liked the idea of Baby Finn growing up in the vampire world and eventually becoming a vampire hunter, but obviously now that can't be the case. Just like with Jay and Little Destiny, we'll get to that when we get to that. Once the gang gets to the vampire's hive, they all separate. However, we mostly follow Fionna and Simon in the scene as they plant Garbos. While doing this, the two find the star. This gives us a really fun scene involving her and her henchmen. This scene is also where it sets in just how important Simon was for Marceline. We know from the beginning of the episode that this world Simon died before he even had the chance to meet Marceline. So the Marcy we see in this episode is what she would be like without Simon's moral guidance. Simon taking good care of Marceline basically saved the entire world. Heck, this even lines up with a line Marceline has in The Empress Eyes, where she tells Ice King that he's the reason why she started staking vampires and protecting the last humans in the first place. Back in the B-plot, Hannah Abadir is giving a toast for Marshall joining her empire. This is when Gary realizes that this is the favor that Marshall did to get him all of these potential investors. It should be noted that this is yet another parent and child not understanding each other type of story. A story type that I was getting pretty sick of near the end of the original show, and even more so in Distant Lands. However, I actually think it works really well here, since Hannah is not a neglectful dumbass like most other Adventure Time parents. She is instead a manipulative businesswoman who will guilt-trip Marshall into joining her. It makes their dynamic so much more interesting than just, lol, the parent is more immature than the child. Back in the main plot, the gang is about ready to finish their plan. Huntress goes down to take the Vampire King's crown, however, when the bombs go off, the clouds are still visible. That's when it's revealed that the Vampire King killed Huntress before she could take the crown. The shot of Huntress's lifeless body goes so hard. Kinda interesting that between this and the farm world, we have two different versions of Huntress wizards who are dead. The Vampire King himself doesn't get a ton of screen time in this episode, but he makes the absolute most of his brief appearance. I honestly like him more here than I did in Stakes. I always found the Vampire King to be a little underwhelming near the end of Stakes. Like, they went a little too far in making him so submissive and pathetic. But here he's treated as a consistent threat the entire time, while still getting in some decent comedy that doesn't undermine him as an antagonist. When I first watched this episode, I was a little confused about how the Vampire King didn't seem to be mentally or physically affected by the crown. My guess is that his vampirism counteracted the effects of the crown. I loved seeing Simon call out the Vampire King for being a bad dad, that was so wholesome. And we get a good parallel in Fionna world with Gary calling Hannah Abadir a bad mom. Hannah's facial reaction here is priceless. Kate tries stealing the crown from the Vampire King, however Fionna teleports them all away before she's able to. This is where we leave our trio off for this episode. But before the episode's over, we get one more parallel as Bonnie and the Star fall to their deaths as Gary and Marshall kiss while riding down the elevator. Such a cool final moment for the episode. Overall, The Star is a fantastic episode, and one of my favorites of the miniseries. I love the setting here, this post-apocalyptic wasteland. It helps make the stakes feel very high. And speaking of which, the episode had a ton of fun references to the Stakes miniseries. The episode showed some good character development for Simon, making him realize just how important him raising Marceline was. Fionna also got some good growth here as she shows concern for people who aren't herself. The Gary and Marshall B-plot, while not quite as good as last episode's, still had a great sense of atmosphere and paralleled the main plot beautifully. But the Star herself was easily the best part of the episode, such a fun character. She's honestly a strong contender for my favorite Adventure Time villain ever, she's so good. Her and Bonnie being arch enemies was a very fun take on their rivalry dynamic from the earlier seasons. Military Bonnie was also a very fun take on PB. But what did you guys think of The Star? Please let me know in the comments, and be ready for next time where we talk about what is easily one of the craziest Adventure Time episodes ever. Squill out.